Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Charming a Knight in Cowboy Boots by Katie Lane. Narrated by Holly Adams. Chapter 1. Be careful what you wish for. Adeline Raquel Kingman hadn't followed this golden rule, and subsequently she was destined to live her life regretting it. Wishes held power. More power than she had ever imagined. Once she'd realized that, it was too late. Her wishes had already been granted in the worst possible ways. Now she was careful not to wish for anything. She didn't blow out birthday candles, break wishbones, care if the clock read 11:11, carefully pick up fallen eyelashes, notice rainbows, or toss coins into fountains. She looked down at the coins that littered the bottom of the fountain her grandfather, King Kingman, had shipped across the Atlantic for his garden. Beneath the moonlit water, the pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters glittered like sunken treasure. Like sunken treasure, some coins were cursed, or at least Adeline's were. If she knew which coins were hers, she'd jump into the fountain and reclaim her wishes. But it wouldn't turn back time. It wouldn't bring back her mother and father, or Danny, the boy she had loved for most of her life. A wave of tiredness washed over her. She was used to the feeling. She hadn't slept well in months and usually felt exhausted and drained. It took a real effort to get through each day. But she did. Not for herself, but for her 3 brothers and sister. If it were up to Adeline, she would continue to hide away in her tower room. But she couldn't do that to Stetson, Wolf, Delaney, and Buck. They had been through enough without having to worry about her. Still, it was exhausting to pretend everything was all right when everything felt all wrong. It had taken all her energy to smile and greet guests at Stetson's wedding reception, which was why she had escaped and was hiding in the hedge labyrinth. She'd thought if she just had a few minutes alone to collect herself, she would be able to continue the farce. But now, she felt even more drained, like a flower deprived of water and sunlight. She lay back on the cold stone ledge that ran along the fountain, resting her arm in the cast across her stomach. If she could just take a short cat nap, maybe she would have enough energy to make it through the rest of the reception. Just 5 minutes of sleep was all she needed. Just 5 short minutes of oblivion with no memories or guilt. Was that too much to ask? She closed her eyes. But just as the fog of oblivion descended, she was pulled back to harsh reality.
"Miss Kingman."
She opened her eyes and turned her head. She could just make out the shape of a cowboy in the shadows. His broad shoulders filled the opening between the hedges, and the crown of his hat almost reached the top of the high, neatly trimmed shrubs. There was only one ranch hand that big. She quickly got up and tried to act like sleeping on a fountain ledge during a wedding reception was a completely normal thing to do. "Yes, Mr. Reardon. What did you need?" Gage Reardon's large, shadowy form didn't move or speak. He rarely spoke to her. He always directed his comments or replies to her brother Stetson. Stetson found it amusing that Adeline's beauty left Gage flustered. She didn't agree. Gage wasn't the type of man who got flustered. He just didn't think she was worthy of his attention, which annoyed her. "Did you hear me, Mr. Reardon?" she asked. "Or do you need my brother here to translate?" She could feel his hard gaze, and it was a struggle not to fidget beneath it. Finally, after what felt like forever, he spoke.
"You shouldn't be out here all by yourself, Miss Kingman. You need to get back to the party."
She knew he was just following orders. Stetson's orders. Ever since the accident, Adeline had not been allowed to do anything alone. If her 3 brothers weren't keeping watch over her, this man was. and she was sick of it. She wasn't a sheep who needed a shepherd. She stood and shook the wrinkles out of her lavender maid of honor gown. "I realize you're Stetson's right-hand man, but you don't give me orders, Mr. Reardon. I'll go back to the reception when I want to go back to the reception." She waited for him to leave. Unfortunately, he didn't. He just continued to stand there, as still as the bronze horse statues placed throughout the garden. She crossed her arms to show her annoyance, which was difficult with her cast. "Is there something else you needed?" "No, ma'am." "Then why are you still here?" There was another long pause.
"Because you are."
She dropped her arms. "So you aren't going to leave until I do?"
"Pretty much."
Now thoroughly ticked, she took a few steps closer. "I'm ordering you to leave."
"I don't take my orders from you, Miss Kingman. I take them from your brother, and he's asked me to keep an eye on his family, you included. I won't have something happening to you on my watch."
His cowboy hat dipped, and she knew he looked at her cast.
"You should understand that after what happened to you and Stetson."
She huffed out her breath. "Believe me, I do understand, but I seriously doubt that whoever tampered with the brakes on Stetson's truck and caused our accident is stupid enough to try something in the middle of a wedding reception attended by the entire town."
"What makes you think that would be stupid?"
"Because he'd be caught. All I have to do is scream, and my brothers—" For a large man, Gage moved quickly. Before Adeline realized what was happening, he had a hand over her mouth, and she was pinned against his rock-solid body. Adeline suddenly felt like she had been plugged into a power source. A sizzling current raced through her, obliterating her exhaustion. After months of feeling absolutely nothing, she felt. She felt her heart thumping madly beneath her ribcage, blood racing through her veins, her lungs expanding with every breath, and her nerves tingling on every square inch of her skin. She was terrified. Not of Gage. She knew he was just trying to prove a point. She was terrified of all the feelings that seemed to be gushing up from the vault she'd locked them in. She hadn't felt like this since before Danny died, or possibly even before that. And she didn't want to feel. It was much better not to. But when Gage spoke close to her ear, his deep voice caused every cell in her body to awaken and feel alive.
"Right now, Miss Kingman, I could do whatever I wanted to you, and there's nothing you could do to stop me."
He tightened his arm around her waist. Not painfully, just enough to demonstrate his strength. She didn't need the lesson. She was already extremely aware of the muscles that surrounded her, and everything else about Gage Reardon. The warmth of his breath against her ear, the rise and fall of his chest against her back, the bulge of his bicep against her breast, the warm skin of his hand against her mouth. He shifted that hand, and his calloused palm brushed her lips. A flash of heat spiked through her. Heat that she'd never felt before, not even with Danny. Terror turned to panic. She needed to get away from this man. She needed to get away now. When his grip on her mouth loosened, she bit down hard on his finger. He released her with a muffled oath just as her brother called out her name.
"Addie! Addie!"
Wolf came running through the opening in the hedge. He stopped short when he saw them and heaved a relieved breath.
"There you are. I thought you'd left the reception alone. I didn't know you were with Gage."
All Adeline had to do was tell her brother what Gage had done, and he'd be fired on the spot, and probably beaten to a pulp as well. Her brothers respected Gage and valued his dedication and loyalty to the family, but they were extremely protective of her and her sister Delaney. If Adeline told them that Gage had gotten out of line, he'd be gone from the Kingman ranch by morning. Adeline couldn't say she would be sorry to see him go. She didn't know what had just happened, but she didn't want it to happen again. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to say anything. At least, not yet. Not when someone was out to get her family and had mutilated and killed one of their bulls, set their barn on fire, assaulted a stable hand and her new sister-in-law Lily, and tampered with the brakes on Stetson's truck, almost killing him and Adeline. Whoever it was had gotten more and more daring, and next time, someone could actually die. The thought frightened Adeline. She couldn't lose anyone else. While she might not like the way Gage had manhandled her tonight, she knew he'd only done it to make her understand the danger she'd put herself in. Stetson trusted Gage to watch out for the family. That's exactly what Gage had been doing. His methods might have been extreme, but he hadn't actually hurt her. Now that he wasn't touching her, the feelings he'd evoked had receded back into their vault. "As you can see, I'm fine, Wolf," she said. "You don't have to be worried about me." Gage ratted her out.
"Yes, you do. Your sister came out here alone. Something you would have known if you'd been doing your job of watching out for her instead of chasing after all the single women at the reception."
She waited for Wolf to set him straight. Her little brother was a charmer with women, but he could have a bad temper with men, especially if they challenged him. But instead of bristling at Gage's reprimand, Wolf laughed.
"Do you ever take a break, Gage? Okay, so I fell down on my job. You should try it sometime. I heard that Wally Rondo's daughter is interested in you. You can't tell me you wouldn't like to spend some time alone with that cute little farmer's daughter?" "I'm working tonight." "You're always working. You and my brother are two peas in a pod." Wolf grinned. "But even Stetson stopped working long enough to find himself a woman. Go ask Miley Rondo to dance, Gage. You've certainly earned some time off. I won't tell Stetson, and I'll take over keeping an eye on Adeline." "I don't dance," Gage said. Wolf shrugged. "Suit yourself. But if you don't want to have fun, you shouldn't mind if I have some." "It's not my job to have—" Before Gage could finish, Wolf disappeared through the opening in the hedge. Since Adeline wanted to be stuck with Gage as much as he wanted to be stuck with her, she quickly followed her brother. As a kid, she had played often in the labyrinth, so she had no trouble finding her way out. Gage didn't make a sound, but she knew he followed close behind her. As she started to climb the stone steps that led to the garden where the reception was being held, he stopped her. "Please don't leave the reception alone again."
It was still in order, but at least this time he'd said please. She turned and found him standing at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at her, and the lights strung throughout the garden fell across his face. He wasn't what she would call a handsome man. His features were all harsh angles, square chin with a cleft, pronounced jaw that was always covered in golden stubble, wide mouth that rarely smiled, at least not at her, a nose that sat at an odd angle as if it had been broken and not properly set, sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes, broad forehead. His only soft features were his eyes. They were hazel, more gold than green, and surrounded by long, lush lashes that any woman would envy. They stared back at her, waiting for some kind of confirmation. "I won't leave the reception," she said. He studied her for a long moment before he nodded.
"Then good night, Miss Kingman."
He turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone once again. Chapter 2 The wedding reception ended around midnight. After all the guests had gone home and the caterers had cleaned up, Gage checked to make sure the horse stables were secure before he headed to the bunkhouse. He used the bathroom and brushed his teeth, then headed back out the door with his sleeping bag. The repairs to the barn roof had been completed, but the scaffolding remained, on his orders. Gage climbed to the top platform and rolled out his sleeping bag before taking off his hat and tugging off his boots. Both socks had holes in them, as did most of his other socks, and a few pairs of his boxer shorts. He really needed to get into town and buy himself some new underwear and socks, and maybe a couple more t-shirts. But with all that had been happening on the ranch, he just hadn't had time. He picked up the night vision binoculars he kept rolled in his sleeping bag and scanned as much of the ranch as he could see. The pastures, the paddocks, the stable grounds, the gardens, the lake, and finally the Kingmans' house. A year ago, if someone had told him there were castles in Texas, he would have thought they were delusional. It wasn't until he arrived at the Kingman ranch that he discovered the truth. The 3-story monstrosity the Kingmans called home looked just like a castle, with its tall stone turrets, ornate windows, and thick oak doors. The castle even had a princess. He shifted his binoculars to the only light on in the castle, shining like a lighthouse from the top of one tower. Through the glass of the balcony doors, he could clearly see the Kingman princess. She had hair as long and golden as Rapunzel's, a complexion as creamy as Snow White's, eyes as blue as Cinderella's, and a personality as icy as the princess from Frozen, whose name he could never remember. He had no trouble remembering Adeline Kingman's name. The first time he'd seen a picture of her, he'd been struck speechless by her beauty. But beauty was only skin deep. He'd learned that beneath the perfect features was a spoiled, arrogant woman, a woman who could work her wiles on a man, then completely rip his heart out. Gage had come to Kingman Ranch wanting revenge for the damage Adeline Kingman had done. He still did. But to take revenge on Adeline would also mean taking revenge on Stetson. In the last year, Stetson had become like a brother to Gage. He was a good man who had suffered enough grief in his life. He'd lost his mother and father and had to take on the responsibility of caring for his siblings and running a huge ranching business at an early age. As much as Gage was dying to get revenge for what Adeline had done, he couldn't do it at Stetson's expense. He couldn't even tell him the truth about his sister. Adeline wasn't suffering from a broken heart. She was suffering from guilt. He focused his attention back to the window. Adeline had moved out to the balcony and was leaning on the railing like a princess waiting for her prince to scale the tower walls. He wondered if she was thinking about Danny, or was she thinking about what had happened in the garden that very night? Gage shouldn't have grabbed her. Stetson had stressed one rule when Gage came to work on the ranch: stay away from his sisters. But Adeline's selfishness had sent him over the edge. He'd wasted a good 30 minutes trying to track her down after she disappeared from the wedding reception, and what had she been doing? Napping! She hadn't cared that she'd taken Gage from his duties of making sure the rest of the guests were safe. All she'd cared about were her own selfish needs. If she was tired, she should get her ass to bed earlier instead of staying up half the night, wandering her room and the balcony like a ghost. Of course, he should talk. He was exhausted, but he avoided sleep too. In sleep, his mind wandered to places he didn't ever want to go back to desert heat and cold fear, to running from death and becoming death. Even sitting on hard scaffolding, peering in a castle window at a frozen princess he hated was preferable to the terror of sleep. But eventually, sleep always caught up with him. When the ice princess finally went back inside and turned off the lights, Gage lowered the binoculars and stretched out on his sleeping bag. The sky held about 1,000,000,000 stars. Was there a heaven among those stars? Some celestial place where all good souls went after they died? If there was, he hoped as soon as you walked through the pearly gates all your bad memories were erased. He wished that for Danny, for all his Marine buddies who had died, and for himself. But with all the lives Gage had taken, he doubted he'd get to see heaven. He closed his eyes and let sleep finally pull him under. He woke to the soft pink of a dawn sky, and the earth trembling beneath him. For a second, he thought that cursed Texas could add earthquakes to its list of catastrophes. The small town had gotten its name after being plagued with tornadoes, droughts, floods, heat waves, and almost every other calamity known to man. An earthquake wouldn't come as a surprise. But then Gage realized the earth wasn't shaking. The scaffolding was. He rolled onto his stomach and looked over the edge. Stetson stood at the bottom. He didn't look happy. Obviously, the princess had told her big brother what had happened in the garden, and Gage was about to get his ass fired. He was surprised by how depressed that made him, especially when he had never intended to stay at the Kingman ranch for long. But working the horse ranch had given him purpose. While the nightmares of Iraq still plagued his sleep, they no longer plagued his waking hours. He didn't want to give up his daytime peace. But it looked like he didn't have a choice.
"Morning, boss,"
he called to Stetson.
"I'll be right down."
He tugged on his boots and pulled on his hat, then rolled the binoculars into his sleeping bag before climbing down. Once he was on the ground, he braced for a punch. Instead, Stetson sighed and shook his head.
"It seems that Wolf stopped by Nasty Jack's last night after the reception and got into a bar fight. He's cooling his heels in the county jail as we speak."
Gage's shoulders relaxed. Surprisingly, the princess hadn't said anything. No doubt because she didn't want Stetson to get mad at her for leaving the reception.
"Sorry, boss,"
Gage said.
"You want me to go bail him out?" "No, let him stay there for another night. He needs to learn that I'm not going to bail him out every time he gets in trouble. But his shenanigans last night have made me realize that I can't trust Wolf to take over while I'm on my honeymoon."
Gage had to agree. He hadn't been keen on Wolf taking over the ranch from the get-go. Wolf was a nice guy and Gage liked him, but there was a restlessness about him that made him unpredictable. He could be charming one second and volatile the next.
"So, who are you thinking about putting in charge?"
Gage asked.
"Buck or Delaney?"
I'm thinking Delaney. Buck is a little too immature and irresponsible. Delaney is a hard worker, but she thinks too much with her heart. If I leave her in charge, the ranch will become a refuge for every misfit and abused animal in the state."
That only left one Kingman. The princess. If Stetson left his selfish oldest sister in charge, there might not be a ranch to come back to.
"Are you sure, boss?"
he asked.
"I mean, Adeline doesn't seem to know a lot about ranching."
Stetson grinned.
"Actually, you'd be surprised how much she knows."
Gage seriously doubted it.
"But I'm not going to leave Adeline in charge either. She's still too upset about Danny to take on the burden of the ranch."
Gage struggled to keep from letting out a contentious snort.
"There's only one person I trust to do the job,"
Stetson continued.
"That's you."
Gage was more than a little stunned. He knew Stetson trusted him to get any job done, but he had never thought he'd want him to take over the family business while he was gone, especially when he had so many siblings. Gage felt honored and flattered. Stetson took his silence for something else.
"I know it's a lot to ask, Gage, especially with everything going on."
He sighed.
Maybe I should just cancel my trip." "You can't cancel your trip," Gage said. "Taking off your wife is no way to start a marriage. I'll be happy to take over while you're gone." He paused. "But are you sure your siblings are going to be okay with this?" He knew of one princess who wouldn't be. Adeline had made it clear last night that she didn't like to be ordered around by the hired help. He doubted she liked to be ordered around by anyone. "It doesn't matter if they're okay with it. They own shares of the business, but I'm the one in charge. And if I say you're taking over while I'm gone, they'll just have to live with it." He thumped Gage on the arm. "Thank you. I can leave knowing the ranch is in good hands. If you have any problems with my siblings, just call me." "Will do," Gage said, even though he had no intentions of calling Stetson. He could handle the Kingmans for a couple weeks. Even Adeline. After Stetson left, Gage headed to the bunkhouse to take a shower. All the ranch hands had already left. Since they'd spent the night doing security for the wedding, Gage had given them the day off once their morning chores were done. It was nice having the entire bunkhouse all to himself. He took his time in the shower, steaming some of the kinks in his back out that he'd gotten from sleeping on the scaffolding platform. Still, he preferred it to sleeping with a bunch of farting, snoring cowboys. When he'd accepted the job of ranch manager, he'd asked Stetson if he could fix up the run-down house in the north pasture to live in. But the house still needed a lot of work before it would be inhabitable. Gage had only had time to fix the roof before the trouble started on the ranch. The hot water ran out, and Gage turned off the shower and dried off. He had plenty to keep him busy today and needed to get to it. But as soon as he stepped out of the bathroom, the door of the bunkhouse flew open and Adeline Kingman came marching in. She stopped short when she saw him, more than likely because he wasn't dressed in anything but his birthday suit. Her gaze lowered, then quickly shot back up to his face. "Oh!" She whirled around, and he figured the assault on her tender sensibilities would have her scurrying right back out the door. But it appeared her panties were in too much of a bunch to leave, although, from the smooth fit of her tight jeans, he'd say she wasn't wearing panties. Or maybe a lacy pink thong that showed off her full, rounded cheeks. Just like that, his cock started to rise. It shocked the hell out of him. He was not attracted to Adeline Kingman, at least not after he'd met her. Thankfully, as soon as she spoke in her haughty voice, his body came to its senses. His semi-erection wilted like a deflated balloon.
"How dare you talk my brother into letting you run the ranch while he's gone?"
Gage pulled his gaze from her curvy butt. "I didn't have to do much talking. I just had to be the only logical choice." Her shoulders visibly tightened, and he knew she was pissed. He also knew that her voice wouldn't show it. It never showed any emotion. It was always cool and robotic.
"Are you saying that you're a more logical choice than his own family?"
Since he hated talking to people's backs, he walked into the bathroom and grabbed a towel and wrapped it around his waist. "You can turn around now. I'm decent." She turned. Her gaze swept the length of his body, and her cheeks flushed a bright red. He didn't care that he was embarrassing her. She wanted to walk into the bunkhouse uninvited. To hell with her. He crossed his arms over his bare chest. "You were saying?" She pulled her eyes back to his face and blinked.
"I was saying that a man who has worked on a ranch for only a year is a ridiculous choice to take over while Stetson is away."
"I agree, but I haven't worked on a ranch for just a year, Miss Kingman. I've done ranch work all my life." Her chin came up. "Where?" "That's none of your business."
Her eyes shot daggers, but she kept her voice calm.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?